Hello and welcome to Separate Bathrooms. I'm Daddo.
And I'm Cam.
And we are hitting our part 2 of the fabulous Dr. Rebecca Rae. We spoke to her last week, so if you haven't listened to that episode, head on back and listen to that one first because we've got a doozy coming up.
Yeah, it was supposed to be just a regular sort of 40-minute episode, but there was so much gold in there.
Yes.
We turned it off and went, this is a two-parter.
Yes. And we never got to our listener question, and it's such a good question, so we addressed that later on. So I'm excited to get into that.
Yep. So we're diving straight in. So if you haven't listened to episode 1, check that out and then enjoy this, episode 2 with Rebecca Rae.
So people pleasing.
People pleasing.
I would imagine as a people pleaser, because I am one, sometimes that, and I'm, when I talked about how often you don't recognize that boundaries are being crossed, though, as a people pleaser, I know that that's how I've set the boundary up because I've wanted to be liked. I've needed this relationship, and so it in very similar. Well, it's actually the exact same way as you're talking about, honey. I've abandoned myself to be liked somehow and to please others. And so I've set a boundary and then then I get angry that the boundary gets crossed. It's like, well, so it's being able to recognize that and go back and right the wrong of the initial boundaries set up, I would imagine.
Absolutely. And this is where people pleasers generally come up against a wall when the behaviour becomes unworkable. I'll talk in a moment about why the behaviour we're not going to write it off completely, but the whole problem, and it's a good thing because I really want to define what does it mean to abandon yourself. That's a bit abstract, right? It's not very helpful for listeners. What I mean by that is when your needs go unconsidered, especially for a long period of time, or they get dismissed or they're invalidated. And this is what happens in cases of people pleasing, assuming the people pleasing is happening subconsciously. So people pleasing is a behavioural adaptation. Psychologists call it fawning. It's generally recognised as another part of the fight, flight, freeze response, which is our survival instinct, although it's not a survival instinct. It's actually a more advanced behavioural adaptation that we do to cope. Now, generally, when we're talking about coping, we're not coping with a saber-toothed tiger rounding the corner or a car about to hit us across the road. We're coping with, oh my goodness, am I about to be rejected? Oh my goodness, have I let somebody down? Do they feel something negative towards me? Are they judging me? And so people pleasing then, or fawning, is when you turn yourself inside out or upside down to appease that person, to restore what you feel is conversational or interactional comfort. And so people pleasing isn't necessarily a bad thing as long as your needs are met. But when you abandon yourself, which is you go about putting everyone first, or at least that particular person first, over and over again, to the detriment of your own needs, then it becomes problematic. And that's when you'll end up as a simmering ball of resentment and anger that kind of sits kind of ready to erupt like a volcano. Nobody really knows when it's going to erupt, but it will at some point. And you'll end up, I had a client who threw a nail polish bottle above her husband's head in the kitchen. People pleaser, bang! At some point, he just said the wrong thing and she cracked. I had another person who threw an apple pie across a kitchen, another person who threw a water bottle. There's always a story. There's a story of some kind of eruption. And these are meek and mild women, who you wouldn't think that was going to come from. But if you people please enough and ignore yourself, then at some stage your psyche will scream and say, what about me? Now, people pleasing, when it's done consciously, this means that you actively choose to use your superpower, is actually highly adaptive in relationships and means that you make the absolute most wonderful partners in the world, because people pleasers, because of their capacity to read other people's needs and to read social situations, and usually to attune very sensitively to other people, can make sure that they step in and often know what other people need before those people know themselves. Now, that conscious decision is using people pleasing as your superpower. It's a relational strength. It's a gift. But if you do it subconsciously, which is harder because obviously if it's subconscious, you don't necessarily know about it unless you bring awareness to that trigger or that common pattern that you're seeing in your behavior, then it becomes problematic because your needs are being ignored. So I don't want you to automatically, this has happened to me several times. It happened to me in an interview. I was interviewed by someone for the Sydney Morning Herald, and she said, "Oh my goodness, Rebecca, I'm really ashamed to say this, but can I just say that this before I start asking you the questions? I'm a people pleaser, and I'm just, it's so embarrassing to say this, but I just think you should know that about me before I start asking you these questions because I don't know what to do about it, and I know it's like a bad thing, and I'm really high up in my profession. I've done all these things, and yet I get walked all over all the time." And most people pleasers will generally shrink when they would talk about themselves in this sense because you'll see these clickbaity articles that say, you know, how to stop people pleasing in 5 steps, as if it means that you're a doormat, you're about to get walked over, and you can't possibly be successful or worthy in life unless you build some confidence, woman. And it's just not like that. It's not that simple. Or men. Or they. Thank you. Non-binary people.
Or they.
Please, let's include you too. Because people-pleasing does not exclude on the basis of gender or status or wealth or anything.
Yeah.
It comes across and is certainly incredibly common in people who are more critical on themselves and have grown up in criticised environments as well, where you just become really good at thinking, in order to be accepted in this environment, I need to be what the situation needs of me. And if you happen to come up against a more dominant personality, it can become even more difficult to show up as your full self because that self feels vulnerable and perhaps open to being wounded because unless you stay guarded. And so people-pleasing becomes your guard.
This has got to be music to your ears, doesn't it? Hearing
Me?
that you can now use your people-pleasing skills as your superpower.
Well, actually, I
think you
realise
do.
that I actually do. So I've never heard people pleasing put in a way as just as Rebecca described it, as that it can be your superpower. Talk about turning poison into medicine. That it's like, I do that. I am a people pleaser, but I do that as well. That's what makes me a good mum and a partner.
Speaking of superpowers.
I love that. Yeah, there's places that I still need to work on for sure. And everything that you've said just rings so incredibly true. Though, to not dismiss myself as just a complete loser because I'm a people pleaser, that is also a superpower. So that's really great.
Yeah, and you're also not a loser. Can we just clarify that? You're a supermodel.
Yeah, right.
Got it. Such
And
a
our
supermodel.
relationship may have started with me fangirling all over you in DMs on Instagram. Let's just be honest. I have no chill.
It's so funny. I don't even remember you fangirling me. All I remember is that I just remember reading your quotes and following your Instagram page going, oh my God, I just love everything she puts up, including, I have to jump to this one because I wrote it down. I think it's the most quotable quote of yours on the internet. And it's so beautiful. It says, "She was never quite ready, but she was brave, and the universe listens to brave." It's just, every time I read it, it never ceases to give me goosebumps. It gives me hope. It's just, where did that come from in you? How did you get to that quote?
We decided to have a baby.
And
we decided to have a baby, and I had never been maternal ever. Or maybe when I was about 10. I loved babies back then, but decided I was never having kids. And that decision was because honestly I didn't trust myself to parent. I was traumatized as an adolescent, and I didn't trust myself to be able to love a child safely. And I mean psychologically safety. I would never harm a child, but I didn't trust myself to create a thriving environment for a small person. And then Nissa came along, and she was not the 6'4" cowboy that I was expecting to ride in on his horse in the sunset.
Yep.
She was a 5-foot muso chick. Not at all my life plan. And yet she loved me in such a way that I'd never had anyone see me like that and not look away. I'd never had anyone see my full self and not look away. And to be loved like that in such a healthy way made me think, well, what else is possible? If this actually exists, then what else is possible? We had a conversation where, because one of my rules when we first got together was I don't want children. So if you do, then I'm not doing this with you. I'm not being the reason you don't. And she was on board, and then I was kind of getting to the age where we had to have that discussion. Nissa has a genetic hip problem, which meant that she couldn't have a baby, or at least not carry a baby. It would have damaged her hip further. And so it was me that was going to be in use. It's very practical. And we asked our 80-year-old selves, which is how I live my life. My entire life is directed by what would my 80-year-old self want me to do here? Who does she want me to be today?
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool.
If I was to speak to her right now, what would she tell me? And so I had to ask her, and I was like, do you want me to try? And she was like, yeah, I think you need to try, but it didn't matter what the answer was. So if we didn't have a baby, we would have gone to Africa, we would have had an amazing life. And so we tried and we tried and we tried, and it cost a lot of money. And then on the final try, we fell pregnant, and I was like, okay, this is the path, and it's just a different kind of magic. But when we made that decision, I wrote that quote, because there is no part of me that was ready for such a huge rupture to my entire world, really, that is becoming a parent, and a beautiful rupture, but yet a rupture.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so though most of those quotes are actually written for myself. Honestly, I sit there and it's like, oh, what do I need to hear? I'll make it pretty and poetic.
You did. And you got it. You nailed it.
For some reason, that's the one that resonated with most people too. And also for listeners, if you're wondering why it's she, it's because I identify as a woman, not because I was excluding anyone else who might actually feel the same, but I identify as a woman, and that was written for me.
Yeah,
and it just cuts right to it. That's the thing. It's so clear, and it cuts. I mean, it's the perfect line for a song, and so it's beautiful. I have a question. Speaking of brave, from a listener, we need your support in answering it. How do you build up trust again after having it all ripped away by one person? I can't mentally manage giving my all to another person just for them to walk out of my life again. I'm at a stage where I feel like I want to feel that type of love again, but I'm scared to feel that type of pain again.
Oh, there's so much power in those words, isn't there? So you can hear the pain, and you can hear the pull to pull back from life because life hurts too much. And this is one of those questions that I wish I had the answer that I know is wanted. The answer that's wanted is, can you please show me a way to love without risk? Can you please give me the 3-step set of instructions that will allow me to be my full self and have an amazing love and connect with someone on the deepest, most vulnerable level? But I don't want the other side of the coin, which is potentially having someone leave me or cheat on me or taking my heart and stomping all over it. And the bad news is I can't, because there isn't. The bad news is that the answer is that your honouring of your pain is everything, and the grief process around the pain that you carry as a result of what your heart has previously been through is incredibly important to give space to. But now that you're feeling ready to go back out into the world, the only way to find the love that you're looking for is to get vulnerable. And that means that you rip the armor off. You take all the band-aids off that you've put on to try to protect yourself from here on out, and you allow someone to see you all over again. But perhaps the difference this time is that you collaborate together, and as you enter that relationship, you do so with the wisdom of your past self who's been hurt. Now, that doesn't mean that you allow the fear to drive. It doesn't mean that you allow the fear to make the decisions for you, because we know that fear would say, no, mate, no, this is not a good decision. Don't go there again.
Back out.
Yeah. Abort. Instead, you go in wise, but you understand that the relationship itself is a collaboration between you and the other person. And for it to be that way, you've got to show up as your full self. You've got to show up as your vulnerable, expressive self and ask for what it is that you need. Ask for the relationship that you desire and then create it together.
Yeah.
So your I was going to say weapon, but that's actually the antithesis of what I want. Your tools to create that relationship are how you show up. So your choice to be vulnerable and to be open and transparent, no matter how uncomfortable it is, and then to communicate from the very first day. You talk and talk and talk and talk. And these tools there's no guarantee. There's still no guarantee that you'll find the person that fits for you. There's still no guarantee that that person won't decide that after 5 days or 5 years that they want to head in a different direction, because we can't control other people. But you can then have a conversation with your 80-year-old self and say, you know what? I didn't choose to hide from life based on the scars that I carry.
Yeah.
Ooh.
You speak like a poet, Beck. It's just, I'm just like, yep, I think I just need to have your voice in my ear 24/7. It reminded me, I must say, when Cam and I split up many, many years ago, and we were beginning to heal our relationship. And I remember vividly a moment where it was more painful for me to not open up to him than it was to open up to him. Because I had shut down in the hurt. I'd shut down, I'd pushed away because I needed that time to heal. And I just really remember that moment where I just was like, it hurts me now to not open my heart. And it was a real moment of going, I'm ready to step back in. And luckily I had a partner that was ready and willing to keep healing together, just as you said. And we've created a marriage from that moment or from that time. But that made a lot of sense to me, recognizing that time.
Yeah. And that's the process of rebuilding trust together. This person, I think, is rebuilding trust within him or her or their self to be able to step into the world again of love and how fraught that is. When you're talking about rebuilding trust together, you're essentially talking about recreating psychological safety. You're putting the building blocks of your relationship down again. There is a recommitment. And that recommitment happens day after day after day, conversation after conversation after conversation. And it's a dynamic process. And it's scary because you're dealing with two brains and two hearts. This is why love is always so scary. We can't control other people. There are no guarantees.
Yeah.
But when you show up as your full self, as you've said, you both healed together, there's a mending, there's a mending there that actually can make the relationship 1,000 times stronger than what it was previously. There's how we heal from ruptures in relationships actually determines the strength of the relationship moving forward. And I don't think it's spoken about enough that ruptures and how we manage them and how we recommit to the love can actually be the power that we then share and have as our potential as lovers and as a team moving forward in our lives together forever then on.
Oh, that's amazing too, because that is all about, like when you used the words before, changing poison into medicine, Ali, and the idea of using a rupture and that kind of cataclysmic implosion or something in a relationship to actually use that point to be your strength moving forward is quite a different way of hearing things.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And I'm not just making that up poetically. I've seen it clinically.
Well, a lot of people need that too. They need the science. They just don't want the woo-woo. They want the science behind it as well. So, I think it's good that clinical tests or experiences that you've had actually back that up. I think that's great. Before we go, can we get your 3 top tips for drawing boundaries in life and relationships?
Yes.
Just 3 takeaways, along with all the other poetry you've given us today.
How do I condense? So the first thing would be, please remember that boundaries are a gift. I really think that if you have that in the back of your head first and foremost, it takes the sting that you otherwise might have been socialized to feel around boundaries out of it. So your boundaries are your gift to someone else. And then when you're also setting them with yourself, they're your gift to your future self, because you're essentially saying this is what's going to make our future self feel really good. The next is communication. Communication is always so incredibly essential. Please remember that a boundary doesn't exist unless someone knows about it. I know that's so simple, but sometimes, particularly with people pleasers, you can get all antsy about, why did that person do that? And yet, have you ever actually told them there's a boundary there?
Right. Good point.
Yeah. So please communicate the boundary, but also know that you don't always have to communicate consequences. So for people who are passive, conflict avoiders, and really don't like the idea of potentially rocking the boat, you might just have marked in your brain that if this behavior continues, then the consequences will be how you show up in the relationship or how you offer your trust or your, kind of access to your personal self. You don't necessarily need to say this will be the consequences, but please just also know that unless other people know the boundaries there, then how are they supposed to know to respect it? Human beings are incredibly highly evolved, but we are not mind readers. We just don't have the skill. Yeah. And then finally, don't set a boundary and not follow through. It's not a boundary. If you don't follow through, it's not a boundary. It's just not a thing. And there is no anyone with a toddler knows this. There's you get to the point where you understand that if you said that there was going to be a green ice block after dinner, and as long as toddler does X, Y, and Z, then there needs to be that particular consequence in order to get more of that behavior, or if you're taking something away. That it's the same with adults. If you say that something's going to happen as a boundary because that's what you need, then you can't just back away from that because all of a sudden it decides it feels too uncomfortable for you to actually follow through. It's the following through that shows the other person that not only do you respect your own boundaries, but you would like that respect back. Thank you very much.
Incredible.
Doozies, all of them.
Yep.
Doozies.
Yep.
I had someone write on my Instagram about you, Beck, that you are one of Queensland's finest. I'm going to disagree with that. I'm going to say you're one of the Mother Earth's finest. We just have loved having you on. Every word from your mouth is honey. It's gold. It's everything that I needed to hear today. So thank you so much for joining us in the bathroom.
Thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you. And I'm so grateful that I actually got the chance to finally meet you in person, Cam.
We will definitely, once this kooky time cloud that's
Please keep writing songs with my
over
wife.
the earth
Yes.
goes away, we will enjoy some actual, I can get a hug from you.
Absolutely. We will do that one day.
We can share a hug. How about that?
Yes.
That's a better way of putting
There's
it.
a boundary right there, hun. Well
There's
done.
boundaried language.
See, look at us learning. Look at us.
Now I understand why you like her so much.
Yeah.
Listener, Ali's been talking about Dr. Rebecca Ray for a long, long time. And as the history of it goes, her partner, who she talked about, Nissa Ray, is a wonderful recording artist
With a
and
voice
singer.
of an angel.
Yeah, and Al said to me one day, she says, you have to record with Nissa Ray. I'm like, I don't know Nissa Ray's music. And anyway, she played it for me. And you can hear Nissa and I singing a song called Up Down Street on my latest EP.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's got, I mean, we're actually working on another song together, but she has one of the most beautiful voices. She's a great producer, fantastic musician in her own right. So,
What
and
a
now we got to meet
couple.
Rebecca. What a couple.
What a couple. I mean, yeah. I mean, I kind of almost have no words to describe listening to her talk. It's just, she just has an energy that comes out over the airwaves that just makes my entire body relax. I feel my heart opening. She's like a chakra opening, you know? She's just getting all woo-woo there, but just was like, wow, so much wisdom, so much kindness, and she's funny as hell too.
Yeah.
I've spoken to her a few times and over Instagram, and we've had some amazing conversations where it's just she's so funny. She's wicked.
Well, she obviously she's on a podcast, so she's a bit of business, but I definitely got that sense of humour coming through.
Yeah.
That ask your 80-year-old self, have a conversation with your 80-year-old self.
Right.
What a great tool that is.
Yep. And that's a simple one.
Yeah.
That's a simple one. Yeah. And you know what's so interesting too? I mean, it makes so much sense because they've done all those they've done books and episodes and articles about 80-year-olds. What are your regrets? It's never, it's always that I didn't spend enough time with my loved ones, that I didn't say I love you more, that I didn't do the things that my heart really wanted to do. Like it's always those things. It's never that I worked more. Or, you know what I mean? It's so, yeah, it's a good one to take note of. It's a good one to take away. And of course, her 3 tips for boundaries are just fabulous.
Yep. We need to leave it here.
We do. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you've gleaned some gems out of today's podcast, and we'll have you back in the bathroom next week.
Yeah, we've got all sorts of information about Dr. Rebecca Ray's work. She's got a new book coming out. It'll all be revealed in the show notes, so you can go there. And, well, a little housekeeping. If you're loving Separate Bathrooms, please rate and review us on your podcast app. That's going to help us go further and have a larger reach. We'd really appreciate that. Till next time.
Thanks for listening.